Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started. So if you would be willing to finish up getting some pie and take a seat, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Thanks for being interested in our watershed and our community, and for helping us to eat pie. Tonight we have a forum on recreation in the South Fork. This is the 7th forum put on by the South Fork Watershed Education Committee, of which I am a member. My name is Bill Barak, and I'll be your sort of MC for the evening. The South Fork Watershed Education Committee, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, it's good? Is a local, voluntary, unaffiliated, self-organized committee who have written a mission statement which says, an intent to educate ourselves and our community concerning watershed topics for the South Fork Nooksack River in order to increase self-determination related to current and future water use and quality issues. I guess our tagline is self-determination requires an informed community. So thanks for coming out, hopefully to be better informed. Any South Fork resident is welcome to join us. You can find us on Facebook at South Fork Watershed Education Committee, and our web address, or rather our email address is up there. You can write it down if you'd like to get on our email list. Very important. Our 7th forum that we've put on, and every one of them has been supported generously by grants from the Whatcom Community Foundation and Project Neighborly, so we're very grateful to them. Tonight's forum, Recreation in the South Fork, we're very lucky to have 2 guest speakers come out this evening and share lots of information with us. They are Chris Hankey from the Washington Department of Natural Resources and Chris Thompson from Whatcom County Parks and Recreation. Thank you for being here. Hopefully we'll be much better informed about new recreation opportunities in the South Fork and updates on what's been going on. Each of them will have about 25 minutes to speak to us, and at the conclusion of both of their presentations, we hope you may have questions for them regarding how their agencies and their plans may affect recreation plans may affect life here in the South Fork. So we've handed out some paper and pencils if you'd like to write down some questions. We'd like to ask you to please leave your questions until the question and answer period following the 2 presentations, except for perhaps immediate clarification questions. We'll collect those cards if you write down some questions after the first presentation and after the second presentation, and we can read them off, and also we should have plenty of time if you would like to ask a question or make a comment following the presentation. The only thing is we've been learning as a committee that we want to promote equity and fairness, so we ask you to try and be concise and limit your comment or question to 2 minutes, and we'll make sure everybody gets a chance to talk and our guests get a chance to respond. Oh, I was asked to have you turn your cell phones off if you have them on. And I need to tell you about the restrooms. Ladies' room is out the door to the right on the left-hand side. Men's room is out the left on the right-hand side. Same thing for the fire escapes out those 2 doors. Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you haven't gotten a card that you'd like to have to write down some questions, please raise your hand. Oh yeah, I should actually ask some of the other South Fork Watershed Education Committee members if you wanted to stand up or just show yourself. And once again, if you need some pencil and paper, raise your hand high so Erin can see. And you can also use those cards we have a box at the table on your way out. We would really appreciate if you would like to give us some feedback on tonight's forum, any aspect of it. It really helps us to plan future forums and hopefully improve the way we do this. Also, ideas for future forums would be very welcome, so please feel free to write those down. Okay, so with all that said, we're hoping for a vibrant and informative exchange of ideas this evening. I'd like to introduce our first guest, who is Chris Hankey from the Washington Department of Natural Resources. Let's see where I wrote. He is the Baker District Manager. Has been working here for 20 years or more. And Chris is going to give us an overview of DNR land management and some info about the new recreation plan that has been approved for Whatcom County. So please join me in welcoming Chris Hankey.
All right, thank you very much. I'll try to hold the microphone here and see how that works. All right, so again, yes, I'm Chris Hankey, Washington Department of Natural Resources, the Baker District Manager. And Baker District is really the, it's the Skagit River up to the Canadian border, the DNR managed land that's kind of in that upper half of Skagit County and Whatcom County. It's about 136,000 acres. Out of that, in Whatcom County, it's about 88,000 acres. And so my group, the people I manage, we've got a timber sale program, and we design timber sales, then we comply those timber sales, and we have a recreation program in my district. Most of the recreation has been focused on Blanchard, our Blanchard State Forest, and in our Harry Osborne Forest. But tonight I'll be able to talk a little bit about the plans we have for recreation in Whatcom County. Now, before I get into Whatcom County recreation, it's real important that I highlight a few things that the DNR does. And this is, it's kind of the standard speak that the DNR needs to give whenever we have a chance to talk to people, because there's a lot of folks that don't really understand what is DNR managed land. And it is, the mission of the DNR is very, very different than something like state parks, for example. We have a very specific mission in what we're doing, and those lands that we manage have a very specific purpose. And what they are is trust lands. And these trust lands generate revenue. And these revenues get distributed to there's a number of different kinds of trusts that we have out there, and when we do a commercial activity, a logging operation on those lands, a portion of that money, 75% of that money goes to these beneficiaries. The rest is money that we keep that covers our internal costs, the salary of the forester, the reforestation costs, the general land management, road maintenance costs, those kinds of things. So this money we generate goes to specific beneficiaries. Now, in general, the DNR plays a pretty big part in the timber economy of Washington State. And, one of the numbers that we put out there, 20% of the timber harvest comes from DNR managed land. I know we've talked to a couple of the local sawmills here, like the Sierra Pacific Mill that's in Skagit County, the Hampton Industries Mill that's there in Darrington, and close to half of the wood they process there comes from DNR managed land. So it is a big part of what we do, and the revenues that we generate and that support of the rural economies that we provide. We also have ag lands. Most of these agricultural lands are in eastern Washington. We have a few scattered here in western Washington. The bulk of that's in eastern Washington, but they also are generating revenue. And actually, those revenues have been going up pretty steadily. They've been, some of it's kind of that dry land farming, like wheat farming, but they've also been doing a lot of the higher value farming, like vineyards. And those have evidently been doing very, very well for the DNR and for the beneficiaries. So when we manage DNR land, we have some very specific responsibilities. I get calls a lot from the public who ask, why are you doing certain things on the land, or why are you not letting me do certain things on the land? And it really comes back down to what we call our trust mandate, that how we are basically required by law. It's part of it is in the state constitution. We are required to manage these trust lands, and in doing so, we have to maintain undivided loyalty to the beneficiaries. We have to act prudently. We have to think about both current and future generations in the decisions that we make. It's actually a very serious charge that we're given, and so that really drives why we manage the way we do, and why it seems that so often our focus is on these revenue generating activities. Well, there's a very specific reason for that. That is what is required of us in managing these lands. So a number of different trusts, like I was saying. This is kind of the pie chart that shows how it's broken out. The bulk of the trusts that we have are for a fund is for new school construction, K through 12 new school construction fund, and the majority of the acres that the DNR manages, those revenues go into that fund so that school districts can tap into them for building projects they've got going. But then there's a whole host of others. We kind of, in general, we split them into two big pots: federal trusts and the county trusts. And the federal trust, again, the bulk of them are the common school, but there's also a number that goes toward the various universities in the state. They also go to the Capitol campus, maintaining buildings there, into the prison system, maintaining infrastructure. So there's a number of different ways that these monies go out toward, ultimately toward the citizens of Washington, helping to support services out there that don't have to come from your taxes, is in essence what's happening here. So state lands, federal lands, most of those were actually given to the state of Washington at statehood. The Enabling Act authorized for lands to be given to the states to be managed to generate revenue in perpetuity primarily for the school system. And so when Washington became a state, we had all these lands, and over time, many of these have been blocked up, and because originally it was Section 16 and Section 36, I think, originally. But over time, we've been able to block lands up so that we've got manageable blocks, and these lands, again, it's in the state constitution. They are to be managed for these beneficiaries, such as the school system. Again, just a little more information there about these trusts, but it's a pretty sizable trust. The land ordinance of 1785, that kind of established the original township section range category. And again, we got Section 16 and Section 36. By the time Washington became a state, it was those two sections, what was originally handed out. And so just some examples of real school projects that have happened around the state that have tapped into this fund that one particular trust, the School Construction Trust, is paid into. And then the other big category, what just in general called state forest lands, those were mostly lands, we call them the county lands, lands that back in the 20s and 30s there was a lot of default on taxes. All these lands wound up in the hands of the county. The county turned them over to the DNR to be managed to generate revenue for the county. And so that's what we continue to do. We manage those lands, and it's revenue that goes to the county and into the junior taxing districts. That particular one, it is the second biggest trust. Most of them are in Western Washington. There might be a few in Eastern Washington. I'm not sure, but almost all of this is our trusts that are in Western Washington. And just a variety of beneficiaries. Again, the junior taxing districts. A big one here, the Mount Baker School District. When we manage county land in this area of Whatcom County, revenues go to the Mount Baker School District, and that's just a pie chart to help show kind of where these monies go. Mount Baker School District, there's a general state school levy that also gets them, and then the rural libraries, the EMS, county roads, again, non-tax revenue sources that that Whatcom County is able to use. County lands work that they get 75% of the revenues that we generate. The DNR keeps 25% for our management costs. The federal trust, those school trusts, I think currently they get, I think it's 71%, I think. Another unique thing about the DNR and how we manage, we follow a habitat conservation plan. I always like to, just make sure I hit that bullet there when we're talking about DNR managed land. That, of course, we follow, like industry does, the forest practices rules. We have to do that. But the DNR has a few other things that have been added in that help us manage. It helps us manage. It gives us, I guess, community buy-in. It gives us kind of that sense of from the general public that we are managing these lands to the best of our ability, that we are taking into concern threatened and endangered species, unique habitats that are out there on the landscape when we're designing our timber sales. And so this is a major part of what the DNR likes to make sure folks know, that we have gone kind of above and beyond just standard forest practices rules. And specifically the species that we manage for, of course, spotted owl and murrelets. The salmonid species, we have a pretty robust riparian strategy so that when we're designing our timber harvests, we protect streams and wetlands and things that help promote healthy salmon runs. So we're generating revenue, we're providing for rural economies, but we're also trying our best to do it where sensitive and endangered species and unique habitats are protected across big, and this is big landscape view, of course, but across big landscapes. So that kind of gives you a basic introduction to the DNR and kind of why we manage the way we do. Now with that, we can have recreation, which is kind of what this talk was supposed to be about. So we manage these trust lands, we're generating revenue, but in that process, we do have recreation on DNR managed land. It follows the multiple use concept, and one of the things about recreation is as long as it doesn't interfere with our ability to manage for the trusts. And that's really important to drive home, that the DNR wants to promote good recreation. We hear from the community they want recreation. We hear that loud and clear. But I needed to set the context of when we do recreation, we have this big purpose that's behind everything, and that is our trust management obligations. And so as long as we're not interfering with our ability to generate revenue, we can have recreation. So hopefully that's clear. Most of our recreation, it is on trust land, and it's both managed and dispersed. So all DNR managed land is open to dispersed recreation. You want to go out there and pick mushrooms, you want to hunt, you want to hike, you want to go just hang out in the woods. DNR managed land is open for your enjoyment. I always get asked these questions, but of course you can't cross private land to get to DNR managed land. And a lot of our places, many of the places that we have here in Whatcom County, great DNR blocks that we manage do have private land that prevent direct access to them. That's the way that works. But If you can get to DNR managed land, yes, you are more than welcome to participate in dispersed recreation. Now, managed recreation is a little bit trickier. In my district, again, Baker District, I've got 2 spots where I have managed recreation, and that's, of course, Blanchard Forest, and I'm sure many of you have been to Blanchard Forest. We've got trails there that allow for non-motorized use, and then of course day use facilities and outhouses and that kind of thing. It's a managed area. In our Harry Osborne Forest out of Hamilton off of Highway 20, that is also a managed area. We have a trailhead there, we have outhouses, we have places, and that's mostly popular with the horse riding community, but places where they can pull trailers in, they can camp right there, and then a network of trails that snake out from that trailhead and kind of go out into that working forest. Blanchard's still a working forest, the Harry Osborne is still a working forest. Actually, Blanchard just recently changed a piece of it. There is a core now on Blanchard that is being managed as a natural area. So it is approximately 1,600 acres on the top of Blanchard that is not to be managed for trust revenue. There was money that was appropriated for that, and new lands are being bought or have been bought to replace that loss in timber revenue generating capacity. But nevertheless, Blanchard has that kind of special, unique feature going on with it. DNR's recreation mission, I mean, in general, the DNR, I guess like I said a little earlier, we want to provide quality recreation opportunities. We just need to follow our trust mandate in order to not violate our trust mandate in order to provide those recreational opportunities. A variety of opportunities across the state. Of course, we do have campgrounds. We do have a lot of trailheads, a lot of trail. The DNR does manage a lot of forest land, 3 million acres across the state. So we are a big land owner, and so it's natural to come to the DNR looking for recreation opportunities. That is totally understood. And there's a lot of great places to recreate out there. And again, I would highlight Blanchard. It's an amazing place. The key to the recreation program in DNR: volunteers. There's never, ever, ever, ever enough money for any public agency to manage recreation. I don't think it exists compared to the demand out there. So the DNR, we have to go for grants to try to do what little bit of recreation we have been able to do up to this point. We seek grants to try to do this recreation. We can't take trust dollars. We can't take that trust money. That's going to real specific beneficiaries, right? So it's going to the school system. It's going to the county, to the roads program, or to the junior taxi district, to the Mount Baker School District. We can't touch those revenues for recreation. We go chase grants. And we're competing against other government agencies. We're competing against other DNR regions for grants. We're competing against the Forest Service. It's a process, and a very time-consuming process, and there's always this element of uncertainty there. But that's been the reality of where we sit with trying to provide recreation. Volunteers, huge. 50,000, almost 51,000 hours in 2017. The volunteers are amazing, and maybe many of you have been out on DNR recreation projects. It just blows me away when we've done stuff on Blanchard and the Harry Osborne Forest, Backcountry Horsemen, Washington Trails Association, the Walking Mountain Bike Coalition, the amount of time and energy and volunteer hours that they get together to go out and do the work. It's staggering, and it just also highlights how passionate people are about finding recreation on DNR managed land. Yes, we hear you loud and clear. You're passionate about it, and that is clearly shown in just the number of volunteer hours that are collected. And of course, we need that for grant match. When you get a grant, you got to show you're most successful in getting a grant if you can show that you've got a lot of support, which is called grant match. And so you get a certain amount of money for your grant, and you want to show that you can also make what is the equivalent amount of money in volunteer hours and volunteer equipment and that kind of thing. So it's huge. So just some fun slides of recreation. Volunteers in action. Of course, a little slide of our law enforcement officer there. We do have one law enforcement officer for Skagit and Whatcom County. He's worked very hard, but an amazing person. Ron Whitehall is his name, and he's a full-blown law enforcement officer and helps keep some semblance of law and order out in the DNR managed land. Because if you've been recreating on it, you know that there are things that go on out there that no one would wish were going on land. So that brings me to Baker to Bellingham. The agency heard loud and clear from the citizens of Whatcom County that they want recreation in Whatcom County. There is no designated recreation in Whatcom County on DNR managed land, no sanctioned recreation. There's the dispersed recreation, but there's no sanctioned recreation on DNR managed land in Whatcom County at this point. So the agency heard loud and clear, yes, we want it. And so they initiated a planning process. And this planning process is called Baker to Bellingham. And it was designed to try to figure out where can we have recreation in Whatcom County on DNR managed land, and what's that going to look like, what kind of recreation, et cetera. And so you go through this whole planning process, and you want to develop a plan that'll last for 10 to 15 years, and you've identified the landscapes you want to be on, and that's what we went through. And maybe some of you showed up at those meetings. Some of those meetings got very contentious there because we initiated the planning process with both a motorized component and a non-motorized component, and oh my gosh, what a situation we all got ourselves into. So it is a non-motorized plan. That is what we wound up with, and so it identified landscapes we want to be on. It should last, the idea is for 10 to 15 years, and it gives us the ability to move forward is really what it does. Of course, we had a committee that was part of that process, real important that we get that buy-in from the community. The majority of the committee members, I think, were really representatives of some of these big organizations that really do a lot of volunteer work. Again, like Washington Trails Association, that really can drive these huge volunteer efforts because, as I showed earlier, we need volunteer time. And part of this process also, and Chris will be able to talk a little bit about it too, is that we're also looking where we can connect in. So recreation that can connect into stuff that Whatcom County Parks is doing, and there was a huge desire for that, and that's what this plan helped to get into place. Just a slide on kind of the planning process. We got to, we try to gather a bunch of data, biological data, geological data, social data. We want to collect all this information. Then the committee and the DNR start assessing it, putting it all together, and then you come forward with some final recommendations. And then, of course, the DNR kind of puts its final stamp on, and yes, this is what we'll finally go forward with. These pieces here, these pieces we won't. And then our Commissioner of Public Lands, so I believe everyone knows, but the head of our agency is an elected position. Hillary Franz is our elected Commissioner of Public Lands, and so she signs off on it, and we're rolling with the plan. Yep. So to the general Whatcom County landscape that we were looking in, it was a county-wide view at first. A bunch of maps got generated, public meetings were held. Where do people like? Where do they not like? Where can we go? Where can we not go? A bunch of concepts. Finally wound up with concept H. It took a while. And then we got to a final plan and kind of a final idea of where we want to go. So, where are we going? Let's see if I got a little pointer here. Where are we going? So, Lake Whatcom here, if you can kind of see the pointer. So that is one area identified. We called it Stewart Mountain, but it's really Olson Creek, if you're familiar with that area. Olson Creek is kind of one of the areas identified as fitting in with recreation, because of course it's around Lake Whatcom Park. And then just kind of southeast of it, there is we called it the Mirror Lake piece, for us old foresters that have been running around out there. I called it the Hainer system, but anyway, that system there was also kind of identified as being able to tie into this Lake Watkin Park. So the idea is we could have trails on us, into Lake Watkin Park, back onto us. Red Mountain was another area identified. This is all, again, non-motorized, identified for recreation. You know, there's Silver Lake Park up here, the ability to have trails that go in and out of Silver Lake Park. That is already pretty popular with the horse riding community anyway. And then the North Fork. North Fork's a huge area. It's big acreage out there. We are doing a lot of work with the marble murrelet, and the marble murrelet has kind of driven what really can happen in the North Fork and what really can't happen in the North Fork. And so we carved out a little area that we could do recreation planning on in the North Fork, but the bulk of it, we need to have our final marble murrelet management strategy, which we have put out there now for comment. So it is officially posted, our final marble murrelet strategy. And once that is settled, which I believe December is kind of the goal, then we'll know exactly what we can do in the North Fork. Yes?
Can you clarify, please, what the lines indicate? You got horizontal, diagonal, vertical, and then you got two colors.
Yeah, all they were trying to do here is just highlight, I think, all it's signifying here is just the differences. They were just trying to highlight North Fork area, Red Mountain, and Stewart. The colors did not mean anything in particular, and the striping going one way or the other, that had no particular significance. It was just a way to kind of make them leap out, I think, is what the cartographer was trying to do. Yeah. So those are the landscapes we wound up saying that we can do recreation planning on. All the other DNR land in there is that we manage. The other DNR managed areas, it's still open for dispersed recreation. So the hunting, just the general, mushroom picking, going through the woods, just having a good time, that's all still absolutely available on the rest of DNR. Just formal recreation in these other areas, potentially formal recreation. Yep. Yep, that's Acme right there. Yes, exactly. Yep. So that's Acme right there, and Mosquito Lake Road would go something like that. So. And the yellow color? Yeah. Yep. That little yellow right there is actually South Fork Park. Right outside Acme. So the new trailhead that's right over here. And the big one, northwest Acme? That's right here? Yeah, that's the big Lake Watkin Park. So County Park. So that's the big county park, Lake Watkin Park, Lookout Mountain Park, Lake Watkin Park, and DNR has these pieces on either end of the Lake Watkin Park. Yep. So that's, County Park, and then DNR on the other two sides there. So we already talked about that, but just connectivity, linkages. I'm probably over my time here. So is that no, come on. Trails and facilities. So that's the whole point. Or in organized where we have this managed recreation, we will have trailheads. We'll have some kind of facilities there. We'll have some kind of law and order there. We'll have. Hopefully, if we get the grants, and all this again is based on getting grants, getting money, so we can actually do something instead of just having a paper plan. We can actually make something happen. We need money. We'll have staffing, and that's one of the keys. Staffing that can actually, work with the community, work with user groups, work with volunteer groups, plan where the trails are, get rid of trails that we don't want out there that have been user built. Allow other trails that meet all the specs that we're comfortable with. All of that kind of thing is all what we can make happen now. Trails, sustainable trail design. Of course, that's what we want. And we're still working on these considerations. I mean, they've been thought through a lot, but they're still works in progress here. We want to make sure we do have education and enforcement properly in place. We've heard a lot from communities that are worried about overwhelming their EMS services and things like that. You know, you get you get that many more recreational people out there mountain biking or whatever and crashing. You know, can the community deal with that? Will EMS will it overwhelm them? So these are all things that are still being talked about and considered and trying to get figured out how this stuff gets implemented. And maintaining these partnerships, and of course, working with Whatcom County Parks will be a huge partnership here. So you can find the whole plan. That's the website. You can find the whole entire plan right there. Yeah, that's probably enough. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. So I'm sure Chris, got you thinking. I hope you'll take a minute. If you got a question, write it down. If you're not the type that likes to stand up and ask a question, please feel free to write it down and we could read it off anonymously. Right? So they're here to answer our questions, so please give it some thought. Let's see. I forgot to mention earlier that we are recording tonight. So just excuse me for just a minute. I just wanted to, so hopefully other people who are not here can see this on our Facebook page, on YouTube via a link to our Facebook page. So I just wanted to let you to know that if you are shy about standing up and possibly being recorded, you may also want to think about that and write a question down. All right, so our next speaker here from Whatcom County Parks and Recreation, please welcome me in joining Chris Thompson, who is going to speak to us a little bit about an overview of his department and some updates on parks in our area, especially the South Fork Park. Please welcome Chris Thompson.
Thank you for inviting the department into your community tonight and letting us share some information with you. So I appreciate your time. I am Chris Thompson, our operations manager for Whatcom County Parks. I've been with the department for about 5.5 years now. I actually worked for DNR for 19 years, 16 years before coming here. So I kind of knew what Chris was going to talk about and knew that he would use some of my time, so I was really happy about that. But he also, that also gave me some cues to remember to talk about what our department's about. And so we have a mission to, I'm just going to read it, which I actually don't like to do, but I think it's good for me to read our mission. It is the goal of the Parks and Recreation Department to enrich the quality of life for the community and preserve the natural cultural heritage of the county through provision of outstanding parks, trails, open space, natural areas, recreation activities, and senior services. So that's when you start to dig into that, it's actually a fairly broad mission statement. A lot of people, for example, like Chris pointed out, some of the things that the DNR does that people don't realize, our department's responsible for senior services in Whatcom County. So we have either senior centers in various parts of the county, or we have partnerships with other organizations that run senior services in partnership with the county. We also have a lot of open space and conservation areas, natural areas. We have a lot of historic homes and things like that. And so we're a pretty diverse organization, maybe not as diverse as the DNR, but for a county department, pretty diverse. And you start to think about what does that mean? And so for us, that means that we manage roughly 16,000 acres of land throughout the county on over 70 properties, and it's really about 78. Depending on if you lump some of those together, some people say 74. And they include natural areas, parks, gardens. If you've ever been to Hovander Homestead Park, the gardens around the house. We partner with the master gardeners of Whatcom County to manage that. So we manage a lot of partnerships and volunteers, just like the DNR. We have tidelands, we have beaches. I've already mentioned historic buildings and trails, and quite a number of different facilities, including a fire range. If anybody's ever been to Plantation Range, it's somewhat of a unique situation for a parks department in the state of Washington. But we've been operating that for 35 years or so now. Our properties are dispersed throughout the county. That map is kind of hard to see, but you can imagine 74 properties throughout the county. We run essentially from Saltwater to about Glacier. And then we hit the Glacier Cemetery, which we manage, and from border to border, north to south. So as I started thinking about what we wanted to talk about today, I was told we really should kind of focus on the Acme Valley, and we have some properties throughout the Acme Valley or adjacent to it that I thought would be good to focus on. But I do want to point out first, as you're looking at these maps, all that sort of purplish pink, that's the DNR land that Chris was talking about. And so you can see, you'll be able to see as we go through this, the interfaces, because that's, I think, becoming more and more important as we move into the future now that the DNR has done their recreation plan. So I'm going to first talk about Lake Whatcom Park primarily. We also have Lookout Mountain Park. That's in the Lake Whatcom watershed. Felt it important to talk about that today for a couple of reasons. One is there is a lot of traffic visitors that go from the park over and then down into Acme Valley. And so we see a lot of that, and we have challenges with folks going onto private property, just like Chris talked about. And so we work with those private property owners to come up with solutions that still allow that access, but try to protect their private property rights. We're working on a lot of trail. We did a trail plan for Lookout Mountain and Lake Whatcom, and we've been implementing that. And so, hold on. Talk a little bit about that. So this is Lake Whatcom Park on the right and Lookout Mountain Forest Preserve on the left. And this is the trail plan that we developed and adopted and have been implementing for the last couple of years. To date, we've built roughly 12 miles of trail. This year, we're working in Lake Whatcom Park building 6. And we're wrapping that up. And so if you've been out and walked the new Chantrell Trail, we've just extended that another 3 miles. Our plan is eventually, next year, we're actually going to start connecting back down to the Hertz Trail so that we can create a nice large loop. And we have the Canyon Lake Community Forest, which is on the other side of the valley. And I know I'm going to get asked about this, so I'm just going to put it out there right now. When can we drive to Canyon Lake again? Probably most of you know that many years ago we lost the road that was our access. It washed out. It was determined not really feasible to rebuild that section. We could rebuild it, but it was just going to wash out again. So we've been working with our partners who own Canyon Lake Community Forest with us, Whatcom Land Trust, Western Washington University, ourselves, and other landowners like the DNR to gain road access to Canyon Lake Community Forest. And you're going to say, well, where are we now? Tomorrow we have our next meeting to discuss that and really trying to put together some concrete plans for things that we might need to do for road maintenance, things that we might need to do for public safety on that forest road, because we're looking at connecting through a forest road, and upgrades and improvements to the road, and then long-term maintenance. And we're hoping that as we resolve those things, it gets us closer and closer to securing the easements that we need to provide that public access. So what do we have at Canyon Lake Community Forest? We have a wonderful lake. We have old growth forests. We have a trail system. It's a non-motorized trail system. I've never been fishing there, but I hear that though the fish are small, the fishing can be wonderful at times. Then we have South Fork Park, which is, in proximity to this community and is probably very important to the community, no matter your opinion on it. It's a very important asset. Some of the things that we're doing there, so we have the Nesset and Overby farms and the Galbraith farm, and you can see that they're disconnected. So our plans, when we developed the plan, was to build a trailhead on the Galbraith farm that would connect down to the Nesset farm. And then we're going to restore the Nesset farm, the Nesset homestead house, and the other ancillary buildings there. And so that was the plan when it was put together. What we've been able to accomplish so far is this was the conceptual plan for the trailhead on the Galbraith farm. That was completed and opened. It looks very close to what you see here, with the exception of, because we didn't have the trail connecting from Galbraith to Nesset, we felt it a good idea to put a soft tread trail around the perimeter of that field. So we have a mowed trail that we maintain around the perimeter of the large field. And I'm going to skip back to the trail in just a second. At the Nesset Farm, several years ago, we completed restoration with our partners, restoration of the barn. We've completed stabilization and restoration of the exterior of the homestead house, as well as the equipment shed, and some other ancillary things that we've accomplished there. Our next phase is to go into the interior of the home and restore that, as well as build a restroom facility that will facilitate public use once that we get the trail built, and then some interpretive features. And so I'm going to slide back here to this, and you can see that green line. That's the trail that's anticipated to connect the two parcels. It's one of those partnership opportunities that we have with the DNR, because where it lays is actually outside of those two parcels is DNR land. So we've been working with the Department of Natural Resources and other stakeholders to finalize that route, figure out what's the best way for us to navigate the various constraints we have, be it environmental, cultural, whatever it is, to get that down to the Nesset Farm. We're also continuing to work on securing funds to be able to build that trail. So those are the things that we have going on in the park. We have some other properties, you know, in proximity to the valley, like the Deming Eagle, and Nugent's Corner. We might talk about river access in a little bit. I'm anticipating some of those questions, and so I can talk about what things we have there. With that, I think I'm done.
Thank you very much, Chris. So have some of you written some questions down? Would like to have them collected? Please hold them up, and some of the committee members will come around. Hold them up high. What's that? If it'll work. Sure. So do we have some questions, some comments? This will be the time to do that. We would like to ask you to, I'm sorry, that was sort of a rhetorical question for the moment. Just a couple reminders. If you're verbally asking a question, please try to be concise and limit your question or comment to 2 minutes. Let us know who the question is addressed to. That would be helpful. You can either speak up or you can come up and talk into the microphone, which would be great. If you'd rather not do that, you are liable to have me translate your question, though. So I'll do the best I can. But if you do want to stand up and ask a question, please try to speak up so we can all hear. And anything else? Yes. So do we have some questions collected? Oh, and while we're getting those, I'd also like to introduce Val Lloyd, one of the members of our committee. She's going to keep track of the questions and make sure any that are not answered, we'll write them down, and hopefully we can follow up on them and get the answers to them. Yep. Okay. You guys ready? I guess this is a question, it doesn't necessarily say who it's to, so if you do write a question down after this, that would be good. I imagine this is probably for you, Chris. What are you doing about the root rot in the Saxon area?
Okay, root rot, yes. I like talking about root rot. It's terrible. Yeah, so we've got a number of places where the root diseases are really bad. Because of some of the recent summers that we've had, it seems to really have been exacerbated by these drier conditions. Now, this past year is pretty darn nice. This was a great summer, almost no fires. It was no smoke. It was pretty nice. But the past 5 summers before that, just the stress conditions that the trees have been dealing with, we're seeing it manifested a lot more in in tree die-off. The root diseases, primarily laminated root rot, it's kind of one of the big ones we deal with, has really been active. And so, you know, anybody here in this valley looking back up at the Van Zant Dike on areas of it, there's a lot of dead trees there, and in a lot of other areas. And so what do we do about it? Root rot's tough to deal with. It just is. So we are harvesting some of that, and so you will notice, and we've got another one that's about to happen that right out your back door, you'll see it on kind of the side of the Van Zant Dike. We're going to be trying to cut those areas where the root rot's gotten so bad. That's one way we can deal with it, and then we try to plant species that are more resistant to those root diseases. Root diseases kind of, they like certain kinds of trees more than other kinds of trees, and so if we can plant species that are resistant to it, we're that much better off. One of the tricky things here is, with the elk population, one of the species we have been liking to plant, western red cedar, the elk love. So we're going to have some challenges there, and so we're looking, possibly planting a little more hemlock out there, just doing some things like that. Hemlock's not, it's more resistant than something like a Douglas fir, but it is going to be less resistant than something like western red cedar. So we're having to make some trade-offs here. But it's bad. Yeah, it's a lot of our blocks are. So the species we choose to plant after we harvest is one way. Keeping species diversity out there. There's research. A monoculture Douglas fir plantation, year after year, over time, that root diseases can start get concentrated there, and so we're trying to keep up to a point a certain diversity out there, keeping in mind that our money trees are something like Douglas fir. So we're trying to balance that. So it's complicated. Did I answer that? Whoever had that question, I don't know if that was a good enough answer for you, but okay.
You might stay here for just a second, Chris, because I got another one for you. Why can't the DNR remove a junk car parked by the Saxon Bridge? It is leaking oil, which will end up in the river.
I believe I took that phone call maybe a week ago. Okay. My law enforcement officer, not mine, the law enforcement officer for our agency said he's going to get it out of there. He's just got to get the contractor to show up and get it out of there. So it's getting out of there. That's the short answer. The longer answer is it costs money. We deal with junk cars. They're all over our landscape. There's trash all over our landscape, and it costs a lot of money, and it's not always easy to get your hands on that money, and so ultimately it's coming out of people's taxes. I mean, that is not trust. That's not really coming from the trust pool. That's coming. Sometimes it does, but often it comes from other sources, and so we try to get the money, we try to get it out of there. Our law enforcement officer tries to run plates, he tries to find who did it, he tries to get them to pay for it. Often they're already in jail for something else, and so they got no money to pay anyway. It's a weird cycle. I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating to me as a land manager. I know it's frustrating to you as neighbors. We try to get that stuff out of there, but in the end, it comes down to money. It just comes down to money. So that's, yeah.
Here's one for you, Chris. Regarding South Fork Park, can we see some further development of day use, such as picnic tables, beaches along the river, playgrounds, etc.?
I'll start with beaches along the river. That's not something that's typically done these days because of environmental constraints, habitat conservation, things like that. It wasn't in our initial plan. We don't have any plans to do that at this time. That's not to say there isn't access. We do have, folks can access the river through the park. There's lots of gravel bars, things like that. Some nice swimming holes, I understand. I've unfortunately never been swimming there, but I hear there's some nice places. So we do have that access. Playgrounds. I'm going to say I don't know that we've ever considered that for that park. Playgrounds take a lot of effort, lots of monitoring, lots of maintenance. We check on our playgrounds most of them on a daily basis, so it takes a lot of staffing. I'm going to have to say I agree in part with what Chris was saying. Sometimes it's about the money. I don't like saying that. But it's a resource that takes a lot of time and effort, and we can look at that, and I can certainly go back and have that conversation in the office. We recently got I just took a call about picnic tables at South Fork Park, and we're looking into that and seeing what that might look like. So, yeah, does that answer your questions?
Actually, my question was regarding benches.
Benches. Benches.
The trail, we've got the trail around the whole perimeter.
Yeah.
It'd be really sweet to have one or two benches out there somewhere, along the edge of the river would be great. Just for viewing rest place or whatever. There's quite a few people that use our park for day use, for dog walking, lots of dog walkers out there.
Yeah, and one of the things we participate in is the Parkscriptions program. That it's a system where doctors can look at various parks and see what kinds of trails and terrain and topography and grades are in a particular park, and they can prescribe to, let's say somebody has hip surgery and they need to get out and walk. They can look and say, hey, these are the parks. And we're finding in those parks it is beneficial to have benches, just like what you're talking about. So we can look at that. Yeah, we put benches in a lot of our parks. It wasn't in the original plan, but we're happy to look at that too.
Anyone out there like to ask a question? Ari? Did everyone get to hear that?
Can you repeat it? Because
So the question, I'm going to paraphrase here, but the question is the title, Baker to Bellingham, is really the intent behind that to have a trail that literally is going to link Mount Baker all the way down to to Bellingham itself, down to the salt water. And no, but how about I put it that way? How do you like that? So the way the plan is structured is, again, we had specific landscapes that were settled on that we feel we can develop organized recreation in. There is no doubt we have heard from so many users of big dreams about being able to recreate the run up to top of Mount Baker, for example, and finding zones and corridors and places to do that. The Baker to Bellingham plan's a little bit vague on that I think they came up with some kind of statement like the DNR will partner with anyone that has some great ideas and wants to bring stuff forward. We'll talk to you, or something like that. So in other words, there are probably going to be a lot of other ideas that people have floating around out there, and the DNR saying it's willing to talk and hear and think about it and just see what's possible. I know there's these dreams of huge loops that go way back up into the Forest Service and back around, loops all the way around Lake Whatcom. I mean, there's all kinds of big dreams, and so the DNR, we have formally saying we've got 3 landscapes we've identified, well, actually 4, I guess, 4 landscapes that we identified where we think we can have organized recreation. So.
So again, to paraphrase, are we going to add lands to recreation opportunities in South Fork Valley? Is that accurate? So the current plan that we are working on is the trail that connects Galbraith Farm to Overbury and Nesset. We're looking at that, and that, depending on where that trail lies, you know, it goes from a few miles to several miles.
My question ties in directly to his, be a little more specific. Is there a timeframe for this Walrus and Nesset Farm? And I'll mention that the Acme enforcement were brought on board to support completely the South Fork Park. By virtue of its name, backcountry, normally they are only looking at wilderness areas or other trail systems not within New York County. But we were all on board, this has been years ago, and now the horses have some parking and a half-mile trail. So to say that it's been a bit disappointing that we thought we were going to get some in-country or near-country riding opportunities. I mean, why even go there? Which is why you see all the floaters parking in the horse parking areas and hardly any horse trailers, because it's a half-mile trail. So, is there a time frame for when we might get enough to bother participating? And, yeah.
Yeah, so plans like the South Fork Park plan are always dependent on funding and at times easements and other agreements for trail construction. I'll say we had hoped to already have that trail constructed and done by now. So we're just as disappointed or frustrated as you are, because sometimes these things take a lot more time than we hope. In the case of the South Fork Park, we are constrained by finding that final route, which we work on fairly frequently and routinely with a number of folks, and funding. We've applied for grant funding through the state several times now, and this project doesn't compete well with other projects for a variety of reasons: the surface area, economic conditions. There's a number of reasons why we don't compete as well. And so we continue to look for those funds, and we continue to work on the final route. I'm hesitant to give a timeline right now because we don't have those answers. But it is something that the department's committed to completing, and we put energy into it, and we're going to continue to do that until it's done.
What's the ongoing connection that you have planned or exists between building that trail and the efforts for protected fish along that reach of the South Fork?
So the question is about efforts for building the trail and
What's the ongoing connection you have with the agencies and efforts so far to protect fish along that?
in connection with the trail.
Right.
Okay. So
Impact, possible impact.
yeah, so the area that is most concerned for impact to fish is the Hutchinson Creek crossing. Beyond that, we're generally away from surface water. There's some wetlands that are nearby along some of the routes we're looking.
I'm talking about social trails.
So it is the department's position that whenever we discover social trails, that we take effort to close them and restore the conditions to prevent erosion, sediment transportation to surface waters.
I think it would be really good to have some sort of ongoing policy that's clear to people along that way, what you're specifically going to do for that. But, okay, you're gonna close the trail, somebody else, I mean, like you said, gravel bars and good swimming along there, and I don't know what you mean exactly for where those gravel bars and good swimming is. Is it right there where the park is? Where is this access that you're talking about?
So there are some old roadways that go through the park, and they come into proximity to the shoreline. There's some accesses there that were in existence for a very long time. They're still there. If we see new trails being constructed or developed, or if they're reported to us, which we always encourage people, if you come across social trail, to let us know, and we'll take action to close that. And what we mean by that is, depending on the situation, the condition, the environment that it's in, it could be as simple as large woody debris that's put onto a social trail to discourage use. It could be going in and doing some earthworks to regrade it and recontour it, to take some of that, if it's been rutted or something like that, we fill that in and we recontour it, all the way to revegetating.
And what about, sorry, gravel bars and good swimming?
I don't have specific locations that I can point to, but we hear from folks that there are swimming holes there.
Could you just explain what a social trail is?
Yeah, so a social trail is a trail that is not, it's developed either by intentional effort from somebody without permission from an organization, or a trail that sort of occurs because somebody walked through once, they trampled down the vegetation, somebody else sees that trail, and they say, oh, I want to see where that goes, and they follow that trail, and before you know it, you've removed all the vegetation and you're down to mineral soil. And so those are examples of social trails. And so our department's position is that we have department developed trails or design trails, and those are the trails that are sanctioned for use. Does that help?
Well, I'm just thinking that you will find out where these gravel bars are, and then you will build access to them if there's.
We're not building specific access to the river at this time.
So right now, through county parks, there's no public access to the river.
No, I didn't say that.
I mean there, I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out.
Walk in the park and follow the road to the very back and walk straight out and hit the river. If you follow the gravel trail, it's there.
Did everybody hear that? Okay. Thank you.
Are you working on getting some kind of permit to get across Hutchinson Creek? Or are you guys still ignorant?
So the question is if we're working on a permit to cross Hutchinson Creek, or essentially what's the status of that? We have been looking. We've visited a number of sites, probably 20 times in the last year and a half, looking for an appropriate crossing on Hutchinson Creek. We have a number of constraints from topography to stakeholder interest that are and private property. We actually found a great spot, and it turned out to be on private property, so we can't use that spot. So as we're working with our partners and stakeholders, we're looking at these sites, and it is proving to be challenging to find a crossing that will work within our sort of our limits of opportunity. So we haven't applied for permits yet because we haven't identified that specific crossing site yet.
Hi, this might be for either of you. So there's been a lot of long-term camping going on, like on the North Fork, where the bridge is over Highway 9. Just wondering what the actual rules are for camping there, and then if there's any coordinated efforts after people leave to help, get the trash out of there before the river flushes it down.
Yeah, so the question is referring to the where the bridge crosses the North Fork on Highway 9. People that camp there, long-term camping, almost living there. So let me think about this. The DNR has a role in that. But I don't think the DNR has a major role in that. So I know our law enforcement officer will chase people out of there that he knows that are living there because they drive their vehicles out onto the gravel bars. There's oil leakage. There's real environmental concern about vehicles right out on those gravel bars, right at the water. He's doing that through his general law enforcement authority. I guess there is a side of the DNR that's DNR Aquatics, and the tidelands, bedlands, those are DNR state aquatic lands, and so the DNR does have a say over that. Like the fish in the water itself, though, that's not DNR. It's that there's some kind of weird distinction there. So I guess the DNR participates with others: Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ecology, the Sheriff's Department, to try to keep some of that under control. But the bulk of that is our one law enforcement officer who just occasionally goes down in there and chases people out that are parked on it. It's not a real good answer for you. I'm sorry. So Chris might have something better for you here. Hold on.
Well, I have what happens on Whatcom County parks. We don't have overnight camping except for in designated areas. And South Fork Park is not a designated area. Nugent's Corner is actually an area where we have that challenge somewhat often. And our approach is that we don't have overnight camping. So if we find people, we ask them to leave. We ask them to clean up their site. And if we find a site that's unoccupied and it needs to be cleaned up, we clean it up.
So basically, people are not allowed to camp there right at the bridge?
You know, I don't have a good answer for. I am not really sure. That's, and see, I'm not even sure about that. I don't know who really has your. I don't know. That is not my area at all.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, I think it's probably mixed jurisdiction. I think there is a level of there's DNR aquatics land, so they navigable waters, the actual landform under the water, the DNR that is state DNR aquatics. So DNR does have a stake in that, but all the resources that get damaged, that's going to be ecology and Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it's going to be multiple jurisdictions, and the problem kind of continues. So it's a known problem. And so the only thing I can say for sure is I know our law enforcement officer, when he can and sees it, he will go down in there to move people on. And he spends a lot of time on just DNR uplands that I manage, moving people on, because we definitely have homeless issues, big time homeless issues on DNR managed land in many places. So it's not a great answer for you, sorry.
For DNR, could you talk a little bit about the reasoning for the new practice that I haven't seen many years around here, of thinning that you've done up the Mosquito Lake Road and DNR program?
Sure. So that one's actually a little bit complicated for us. So,
Chris, do you mind repeating? I'm sorry.
oh, yeah, okay, repeating the question. Why would we thin stands? The DNR does do some thinning work. And there's been an up and down history with thinning on DNR managed land in general. We do commercial thinnings when what it does is it encourages the tree growth. So you know, tightly grown stands, you remove some of that. The residual stand, your crop trees, quote unquote crop trees, will grow faster. They're kind of released from that competition. They'll put on a lot of size and kind of achieve those characteristics we want faster so that we can final harvest. The thinning that took place recently on Mosquito Lake Road, which I think looks really, really good, there was a whole lot of ice damage. Of course, you know, living in the valley, that was what was that 3 years ago we had all that damage. Anyway, the big ice storm that happened and a lot of damage. That particular area or a whole sequence of areas in there fall in some night eagle roost areas that we can only manage a certain way. And there was one of may even been like an area tentatively identified for marbled murrelet stuff. Even though it's young plantation, the boundaries just grab all kinds of stuff. So anyway, so we had some habitat constraints on that area. We knew we couldn't start the stand over again, even though there was a lot of tree damage in there. So what we tried to do is get out as much of the damage as we could, thin and still leave the appropriate canopy coverage, we call it basal area, the appropriate basal area of the trees in there that still meet habitat objectives. So there's kind of a habitat function in there that's at play with eagles and marbled murrelets. So. Nope. It was not associated with that at all. No, it's some of that area. If we had our way, there was enough damage. Again, we're thinking about our trust beneficiaries long term. There was enough damage that it would make sense from a forestry perspective to cut it all, start the stand over again, and grow, you know, unbroken trees. But there were a variety of habitat constraints that hit us right in that area. So that was the management approach we took. So. Yes.
This is gonna seem really strange, and it's really
Oh.
tried to find out why, and they were told it was ancient riverbed. Well, the whole valley is ancient riverbed.
Yeah, it forms like a Z across the property.
Oh.
I can't figure it out. I don't know why it's there, and then when you said something about former property taxes not being paid years ago or something.
Yeah.
Is there a way to find out why all of a sudden there's DNR property right in the middle of the property?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So the question is a property owner that has potentially DNR managed land in the middle of your property, and why is that there? Yeah. So so that one I'm not going to have a great answer for you either. So there is this whole section of the DNR. I didn't even really go over it in my presentation, but the DNR has a bunch of, we have a regulatory side, we have the state land side that I work on, state uplands, there's an aquatic side, there's the wildfire side, so we got all these groups within the big DNR family. So the aquatics group, again, there is, I think it's in our state constitution, I'm not sure where it sits, but it's the navigable waters, including streams, and I guess maybe old stream beds. I don't know, but yeah, yeah. So how it originally got I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have a good answer for you on that. I do not know. You could absolutely. I can leave you my card, and you could send me an email, and I could forward it on to someone in our aquatics group who can maybe answer that for you. It would be the best thing I could do. Yes, Russ.
I've got two things that are involved with that. One is the original survey in the 1800s identified, we have a similar thing on our property, identified where the river and the islands were at that time. That formed the basis of ownership. The other thing, the DNR occasionally does trade or sell property of that nature. And there's been a project a couple of years ago in southwest Washington, very similar to what you're talking about, that was involved in a land trade with some riparian zones, or former riparian zones. So there are
Well, I mean, we're
different
on the
ways of
river.
saying.
We're on the river. And, I would understand if it was, out there, but why right in the middle of the property?
That's probably related to where the river was in the 1870s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. My name's Alex. I live up the road on Highway 9, and I'm super excited. There's going to be at least more DNR land that's open to recreation. I was wondering, the big chunks of land that you had identified, the Olson Creek,
Yep.
Mirror Lake, Red Lake Mountain, and North Fork.
North Fork. Yep.
Will those lands at all be decoupled from commercial logging? In other words, will you be building trails where you plan to cut in the next 10 to 15, 20 years?
Okay, so yeah, the question is with our Baker to Bellingham plan, where we've got planned recreation that we're going to develop. What does that do to the working forest concept, the lands that we manage for revenue generation that we log, and those lands will very much stay working forests. So they will be logged. So any trails that get built, it will be very clearly communicated, and the groups that we work with have been, they know and have been very supportive of this, but when trails are built, that does not mean that you can't harvest there. There's no buffering off of a trail or anything like that. We still manage the forest to generate the revenue like we always have, and then trails that get beaten up a little bit, and yeah, they just do. They do get beaten up a little. We try to take care, but they will be beaten up a little bit. Those then they can get put back into their condition, through the efforts of volunteer groups and that kind of thing. It probably won't be on the timber sale contracts. We can do some things with timber sale contracts, like, don't use those as your skid trails. Don't just drop all your slash right on the trail there. Just basic common sense things. Fall away from them where you can. Don't pile your slash there. Those kinds of things to help maintain the location of the trails, but then it would be the volunteer groups would come back, and they would and DNR and the people we contract, like the Washington Conservation Corps that does a lot of our trail work, they would come back and reopen those trails up, but they would definitely stay working for us. That's all part of the plan. Just
Follow-up question, just I want to add to that,
Okay.
because I feel like that comes back to the mandate, right?
Yep. Yes. Absolutely.
The mandate comes from the 1800s?
It comes from a couple of spots, but yeah, that's the status, these trust status lands, the federal lands were at the Enabling Act when we became a state here in the late 1880s? Is that when we became a state? That's when those lands were set aside for revenue generation in perpetuity. Yes.
So I guess, what would it take for the state of Washington to manage those lands for multiple uses as the federal government manages those? In other words, there was a climate change in the
Yeah.
1800s. The population was probably 3% of what it is now.
Yeah.
Marble roulette, salmon were not critically endangered. And how would the state of Washington manage those lands for recreation and other values? What would
Yeah.
it take for that?
Yeah, that's a big loaded question there. That's like, do we have 5 or 6 more hours? Perspective is. So what's a good way to answer this? So I'll put on my forester's hat. From my perspective, I think forestry is part of the answer to our environmental challenges that we've got. I cannot think of a better resource to build with than wood. And the way that DNR does it, by following our things like our habitat conservation plan, we can grow trees for wood resources forever and ever. We can harvest, we can plant, we can harvest again, we can plant, and we try to take care so that current and future generations, which is part of our trust mandate, are all taken into consideration. So could there be a way to change the trusts where they are not trust lands anymore? There have been Western states that have sold off their trust lands, that have been able to get rid of them, get paid for them, sink that money into whatever mutual funds or whatever, and go do their thing. Washington chose not to do that. They chose to hold on to these lands and to manage them for current and future generations. And so hopefully, could that be changed? It would take, it's an act of the legislature. You actually got to change the state constitution for federal lands. The county lands there might be a different mechanism there, but for the federal lands, you actually got to have a change to the state constitution and what those lands are designated for. And maybe that could be done, but from a bigger perspective, maybe managing them as working forests can be part of the answer. So for climate change, for salmon species, for endangered and threatened species, maybe by having working forests, keeping healthy rural communities, it can be part of the answer. So that's certainly a perspective that the DNR is really trying to encourage and get out there, that we can manage these lands where there are multiple benefits, including that economic return, but we're not sacrificing long-term environmental health. Does that make sense? I don't know if that completely answers your question, but.
So I'm going to just take this opportunity to sort of highlight some of the partnerships, because one of the things I didn't talk about in my presentation, which Chris said I would, was how are we going to, as they're implementing their recreation plan, how does that interface with Whatcom County Parks? Because you saw on the maps a lot of shared boundaries. And when you think about Lake Whatcom Park, they have planning units on either side of that park. And we have a trailhead that sits in the middle of one of their parcels. And so we are looking at connecting recreational trail opportunities across those landscapes. In the case of South Fork Park, we're talking about the same thing, right? And as we've been negotiating our easement, that is one of the things we talked about. How are we going to treat this trail that leaves Whatcom County lands and goes on to managed forest lands that are managed for the trust beneficiaries? And it's much like what Chris said. So this is an opportunity for me to set expectations for you guys. When we do eventually get that trail, it is going to be subject to those requirements of managing the lands for the trust beneficiaries. So we have language that talks about they're going to try and fall trees away from the trail. They're going to try not to use it as a skid trail. They're going to try not to cross it, or if they have to, minimize when they cross with equipment. And so what that does for us in part is gives both of our departments an opportunity to share different management practices with the public, to talk about the history of the land, because this whole Western Washington has a history of logging. But it also gives us an opportunity to talk about the environmental protections, the environmental concerns and considerations that go into through interpretive panels and things like that. So that's stuff we are working on together. And it, we'll both admit that poses some challenges, right? But it poses some opportunities, because it also gives us opportunities if we have a trail segment that isn't sustainable or isn't functioning well. When there is timber management, it gives us an opportunity to look at the landscape and maybe put that trail in a more sustainable place. And so, those challenges and opportunities are things that we can leverage as we go through time. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
So we spent a lot of money on salmon recovery in that region of South Fork adjacent to the park. And I think Val was trying to get at, I work in that stretch quite a bit. Those structures, we're predominantly doing that through engineered log jams, which are maintained pools, and it's become very effective at holding fish. And the park has sort of already shown it's delivering people to those structures.
Yeah.
We talk about the swimming holes, they happen to be those log jams. So I've seen fires at those log jams. It's getting a heavy use now from the park. There's definitely, we have minimal access along this planned trail route. So I was hoping maybe consider like education, signage, or some effort to make people aware that what these engineered log jams are about, the fact that they hold fish. It's a lot of fun to jump off these jams endlessly, and that's what people do, especially down the low river. But I would hope you guys would consider maybe some kind of educational effort to make people aware.
So the question is, or the comment / statement question is, I'm going to change that a little bit and put it more like, what actions is the department planning or thinking about taking when we see impacts that are adverse? And that could be habitat impacts through jumping off log jams. It could be erosion that happens. And so that's part of our adaptive management processes. We monitor facilities, and in the case of South Fork Park, as we increase our development, we're going to increase our staffing. As we increase our staffing, we monitor the situation more. And when we see problems that are rising, then we're going to take action to put in signage or spend time out in the field contacting people. And the example I'd use is along the Hertz Trail in Lake Whatcom Park. People love to walk their dogs along that trail. They don't necessarily like to pick up after their dogs. And they don't necessarily like to keep their dogs on a leash, even though it's a dog on leash area. And so that causes a lot of conflict. It causes environmental impacts. And so we've put together a program where we have a park host, and they spend time out in the park on busy days just making contact with people, asking them to pick up after their dogs. If they see them picking up after their dogs, thank them. Those kinds of things. And so those are programs that we can put in place as we're seeing more use and more impacts to try and mitigate those impacts. We can also do signage, interpretive signage, regulatory signage, those types of things.
Stephen?
I guess it's a two-part question. For DNR lands, considering that from appearances, the bulk of the forest management of non-recreation areas, working forest, is a monocrop, clear cut, and development in regards to what successes have been attained in regards to maintaining a canopy, which God believes is important in regards to ecological parts of your mandate here, preserving value, biodiversity. Is there any coordination and striving to use what is learned in dealing with recreational areas as far as developing the non-monocrop, clear-cut strategy on non-recreation forestry?
Okay. See if I can repeat this back. So, so concern about kind of the timber management process that you're observing, the clear cutting, monoculture type plantation environments left behind, and recreating and that kind of thing. Not so fun. There are things that can be done to make that a different kind of experience where these developed recreation opportunities are where we're planning on having these developed recreation opportunities. And is there research or alternative ways of practicing forestry, I guess, that would that does things very differently, that emphasizes not that open regeneration harvest type method, the canopy retention. So is that pretty close to your question? Okay. 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 So so what's a good way to dive into this one? So earlier, someone asked the question about root diseases, and my response was part of the legacy of continually planting Douglas fir back in places that have root rot exacerbates the root rot. It gets worse and worse over time. You've got more root rot to deal with, and the system's never given a chance to kind of work it out of it, it's that root disease out of the system. Because it can persist in stumps and old roots for decades and decades. And so you plant a new one next to it, it has a high potential of getting one of the root diseases into it. So there is legitimate concern with kind of that monoculture methodology. I think we at the DNR would say that we don't practice monoculture reforestation. We at the very least, we're always planting 2 species out there. Yeah, that's a little better, not perfect, but a little better. So at least we're not a true pure monoculture type system. But in the end, at least where we're sitting right now, and with climate change, things are changing, no doubt about that. We're trying to stay ahead of that curve, because we think about, when we plant forests, we're having to think about, okay, what is it going to be 40, 50, 60 years in the future here when we want to harvest again? And that's the way things are going. That's almost an impossible task, but nevertheless, that's our task. So with all that, though, we still have to we have to focus on a major component is, are we making money? I can't pretend like that's not there. That is very much a real reality for the DNR. And with that, and you might not kind of like the way this is explained, but we don't actually use the term clear cut for DNR. It's a variable retention harvest. So a variable, I know so a variable retention harvest. We do leave trees, legacy trees behind. It's only 8 per acre. They can be scattered. They can be clumped. The forester has the ability to do all kinds of fun and interesting things with them. But nevertheless, we do leave these legacy trees behind. That's all part of our habitat conservation plan. Again, trying to preserve some of that biological legacy, preserving the mycorrhizal interactions in the soil, and providing future wildlife trees, future snag recruitment, future down wood, that kind of thing. So that's the purpose of those kinds of leaf trees. They're supposed to go through a whole nother rotation, and they build these structures that benefit wildlife, and they help maintain some soil integrity. But again, it's only 8 per acre, and the rest of the trees we harvest. Now, the DNR, and I can just speak from my position. What goes on in Olympia, and kind of in the halls of Olympia, I'm not, sure, but from anything that's been conveyed to us, we need to manage these future recreation areas as working forests. And so, again, if there's a trail that's there and the area gets cut, then it's cut. And yeah, the trail's there, and it might not be, for a while, it might not be quite as fun to hike it. That is the reality of how recreation on the bulk of DNR is just designed to work. And I've heard no talk to do it otherwise. That is how DNR lives into its fiduciary responsibilities and still tries to provide recreational opportunities for the citizens that are looking for that. So that's how we manage. We do have substantial habitat lands that are set aside. Most of those are up against the Forest Service, so they're way back out. They're not necessarily the areas that have been identified for recreation. They're not the Olson Creek piece, or not the Mirror Lake piece, or not. There's a couple of areas in the North Fork that are managed specifically to build habitat, mostly associated with the spotted owl. But we do have substantial areas up the Middle Fork, for example. We have substantial areas up in the Middle Fork where our management is not supposed to be the variable retention harvest method. It's supposed to be a thinning method to build higher quality habitat over time. So we do have lands, and I can't remember the acreage that we manage in my district. I should know that off the top of my head, and I'm sorry I don't. But we do have real habitat lands, like I think you were kind of referring to, out there across the DNR managed landscape. And of course, our riparian areas also have to be managed like that. But the big spotted owl habitat management lands, they're way out there. They're not the Van Zandt Dike. It's not that. It's stuff way out at the end of the Forest Service 38 road. That kind of stuff. So maybe it's not the greatest answer for you, but that's.
We are starting to wind down here, so we'll take just a couple more questions. Russ?
Yeah, Chris, I think to build on what you were saying, if you look across the DNR managed lands across western Washington, generally about 30 to 50% of those acres are off base for timber harvest due to either riparian, steep slope, the Board of Natural Resources overall policy, and habitat conservation. So those are, if you look just broad, those are, and like Chris was saying, those are going to be concentrated more in certain areas. But that's the percentage of state managed lands that are off harvest are somewhere between a third and a half of the acres that we manage.
Yeah, absolutely, and we can't move those around. Those are kind of set where those are supposed to be. So if someone, like, again, if you wanted the Van Zandt Dike to look like that, we don't, that in all the negotiating we did with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get our habitat conservation plan in place, we can't move lands around like that. So they are set, they're where they are, and these other lands are where they are that we can manage kind of more intensively.
I have a question for you, Chris. So trust obligations always have to be measured in dollars? I mean, is that explicitly stated? Is a working forest always have to be forestry? And is there a way to put a value on other sorts of forest uses, outdoor experiences? Is there some way that can be calculated and be a part of the revenue that's you're obligated?
Okay, that's a good question there. I'm stretching my brain cells here on a Wednesday evening. If I recall the language in our state constitution, it refers to timber revenues. So I think in the end, I think the revenue's the key. So what's making real money that's going into the hands of the beneficiaries? But it refers to timber revenue in that process. So I don't know. Russ, do you have a good answer for that one? I'll put you on the spot here.
Proposed change in use, I'm on the Mount Baker School Board, I've been on the board for 20 years, and I also serve as the chair of the Washington State School Directors Trust Land Advisory Committee. So we work with the DNR on revenue issues throughout the state. This last legislative session, we had to fight a proposal to block the DNR from changing, this is in eastern Washington, changing of the current land use of grazing, of which the department was making $1.50 an acre per year. And the department wanted to do a solar lease on the same property. Well, the cattlemen didn't want to give up their cattle grazing at $1.50. The DNR could earn, actually was able to lease on the area. The best lease they had was for $1,000. Same land. So,
Yeah.
So you can change the use if it provides more money. So timber is certainly in western Washington what's generally providing most money. It may not be all. So in the future, there may be some other uses that will actually provide more. So I think it's something that may. What's that? Well, if we keep the maple trees from dying, that's a tough one.
I've heard the DNR is actually pursuing this maple syrup idea. Is that
We've
true?
been working with a local person here. We have been working with a local person here that's very interested in developing this maple syrup industry, and it's awesome. Yeah, so we're working with a person to figure out what a lease may look like and how there can be revenue generated from that process, and build a fun rural business.
If you don't mind, I'll add to that a little bit. Now, I'm not speaking for the DNR. This was just when I worked at the DNR. When they were looking at conservation for recreation or natural areas on the Blanchard Forest block, they did do an economic study looking at the economic benefits of recreation versus traditional trust land management. And one of the things that came out of that was actually very difficult to put, in that situation, monetary value on it and what you would get. And then in the case of the DNR, how that then benefits the trust beneficiaries, right? Getting away from DNR, there's across the country, there's lots of economic studies on the benefits of recreation in communities. And depending on the approach, the methodology, and the type of use and where they're at, some of them show great economic benefits, and some of them are harder to pin down. So that opportunity is there, and there are methodologies. It's just sometimes hard to apply to a specific situation.
I appreciate that because it's difficult. It is difficult to measure those sorts of values, but I'm hoping maybe as we move forward, we keep looking in that direction. Particularly when I sometimes feel like there's pressure to log steeper slopes to generate the revenue, when perhaps some other sorts of revenue would be better, especially if there's slides and what the cost of that is compared to what we would generate for the state. Did you want to say anything? No? Okay. I think we're just about out of time. Would you like to ask one more question?
I just have one quick question, and they may or may not have the answer. I read in, I don't know if it was Scientific American or National Geographic, that cottonwood trees gave off methane gas. And I'm not from the silviculture, and I forgot to ask her. That would have been way too simple.
I'm sorry, I haven't heard that one.
So the question was, do trees give off methane gas? Cottonwood trees. Oh, okay. Anyone? Not.
Cottonwood's such a weird tree, though. There's been it can be like this pipe of water up into it, and so I'm wondering if somehow something associated with just the way it retains water. I mean, I've cored into one before, and when you pull it out, and it's just like a gusher just shooting water out. It's incredible how much water just is up in a mature cottonwood. So it's incredible. So maybe there's something associated with just the way it holds and retains water, that somehow it can generate methane inside itself. I don't know.
All right.
I just have one quick comment about, when you're talking about approaching people who are camping or living, it seems like they're living. I'm wondering if, as you do that, do you have policies for also always carrying some sort of packet of information for what resources might be available to those people, rather than kind of going in with we're going to clean it up and be, on the punitive side, rather than, well, this is a real thing, and we're facing that in the Valley a lot, and people have a lot of questions, and embedded in that is our sense of humanity also. So I just encourage you as organizations to consider that.
No, yeah, thank you. That's brilliant. I've never thought of it like that. So thank you.
All right, that's about it for the evening. Would you please join me in giving a warm round of applause to Chris and Chris? Thank you so much for being here this evening. And in addition to repeating the questions, I really appreciate that you did that, and taking the time to answer all these questions. Thank you so much for being here. A couple other more thanks before you leave. We'd like to thank the Whatcom Community Foundation and Project Neighborly again for funding us, for Acme Elementary for providing the space, for Acme Diner for providing the pies, for the child care provided over here and by Judy Strachella. And we'd like to thank the South Fork Watershed Education Committee for putting this on. And all of you for coming out. Thank you so much for being here. Actually, I looked up the word recreation, and the Latin derivation, according to Webster, to refresh, to renew, what was it? To restore, to refresh, to create anew. So hopefully with our knowledge and our care, we'll go out and we'll continually create anew, restore, and refresh our community and our watershed. Thank you for being here. One more thing.
I just want to let you know that we are working on our last forum for this grant cycle. So in November, we're planning another forum here on chemical spraying in the South Fork Valley. So that's going to be really interesting. We have somebody coming out from the Department of Ecology and a professor from UW who are going to come talk to us about the effects of chemical spraying. Also, if you are not on our mailing list, if you did not receive an email alerting you to this forum, please get on our mailing list by writing your email down on a card and dropping it at the front table, and we will put you on that list. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, also, if you want to write down any feedback, just go ahead, write it down. We want to hear it.
Sorry, I forgot about that part.